Hey everybody, how's it going? By now you've probably heard that X, formerly known as Twitter, has been banned in Brazil, one of their largest markets, as a result of a several-month-long legal struggle. A lot of people are saying that it's a free speech issue. I don't really think it's a free speech issue in the same way that Telegram being, pursued by the EU wasn't so much as a free speech issue. Now, I don't agree with Pavel Durov being personally held liable and accountable. I've talked about that all in the video. Telegram has issues, and I think a lot of those issues are similar to what's going on with Twitter. Yes, I will call it Twitter because that is what I know that entire brand as for the entirety of its existence, which is most of my life. And I don't understand someone spending $44 billion and taking one of the company's most valuable assets, its brand, and throwing it into the trash because they have an affinity for a certain letter. And that letter is also what they got kicked out of PayPal for, trying to rename it to. And part of many other things, but that's a whole other tangent we can go into another time. But be that as it may, we'll go into the timeline that a lot of people are moving over to Blue Sky. I'm not a big fan of Blue Sky because it's still basically in beta, but I do think it is an argument for decentralized social media, which I've talked about in another post. And we'll start with the timeline, and then we will talk about an issue I do think that is related to this that is a free speech issue. Now, first off, back in April, a justice, Alexandre de Moraes, had ordered the suspension of dozens of accounts for allegedly spreading information. And many of these were apparently belonging to supporters of the former right-wing president Jair Bolsonaro. And that is because they have to be blocked while they are under investigation. Now, X closed its office in Brazil last month, saying its representative had been threatened with arrest if she did not comply with orders it described as, quote, censorship, end quote, which it said was illegal under Brazilian law. Now, Musk had also made the point of, quote, free speech is the bedrock of democracy and an unelected pseudo-judge in Brazil is destroying it for political purposes, end quote, which I find an absolutely rich quote from Elon, who himself has banned people off his platform for saying and doing things he doesn't like. The same guy that said this is the town square and, freedom of speech is an absolute right, and then kicking people off. Now, be that as it may, so a 5-panel Supreme Court Justice panel imposed a deadline, and they, being Twitter, did not appoint a new legal representative in time to be representing the company. And basically, of course, the ban got upheld because no one could argue on behalf of Twitter, so it happened. They closed their office and then packed it up. Now, I do say that Flavio Dino, this point, I think, is really good, and it's going to start the discussion of why I think I don't think it's a free speech issue, is that, quote, freedom of expression is closely linked to a duty of responsibility, end quote. He continues on saying, quote, the first can't exist without the second and vice versa, end quote. That is one thing that I think a lot of people need to understand, is that freedom of speech does not absolve you from the freedom of consequence. And also, freedom of speech is also separate from the right of freedom of association, which I think a lot of people get mistaken. And by the way, if I'm scratching my nose a lot, my allergies have been going crazy today. I'm sorry. But, basically, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Misinformation and disinformation, such as that, can infringe upon the rights of others. Because you can cause panic. You can cause people to get pushed, shoved. They can fall over, get trampled on. There have been people that have, lost their lives, panicking, running away from a fire. Things like that. And misinformation and disinformation is a problem that we've seen throughout many years. And it pre-existed social media, where misinformation and disinformation, you don't even have to pull a Godwin's Law and, go to the Holocaust for this. You don't even have to. Just look at the civil rights movement in the United States. Look at, apartheid in South Africa. You can look at, of course, many different genocides around the world. The Rwandan, the Armenian, pick one. And a lot of them start with misinformation and disinformation. Now, I'm not saying everything leads to that level, but misinformation and disinformation does have the ability to infringe upon people's civil rights and cause loss of life, intentionally or unintentionally. For example, we had many people dying of diseases for many years. Then we found vaccines. And a lot of people now, due to the success of vaccines, ironically, think that vaccines are a problem. Because some of them may give you a side effect, but that side effect is often not only statistically less likely of a problem than the problems that can come from the disease, but statistically less of a problem than the disease itself. For example, polio. We basically eradicated that disease in this world. And now it's making a slow comeback, apparently, in certain pockets because people are not getting vaccinated. That's an issue with misinformation and disinformation. And why are people doing that? Some people say, well, vaccines cause autism. That's a whole other, can of misinformation there I'm not going to unpack right now, but it's a flawed study. And you're going to tell me you're more worried about kids having autism than not being able to walk or live? Come on. That's an example of misinformation and disinformation being a problem, and that why we have the responsibility to stop it, and why I don't think it's necessarily a true free speech issue, because some speech can be harmful. And I'm not even talking in the, cancel culture way. I'm talking about in the yelling fire in a crowded theater, saying things that can cause to possible life or civil rights loss, things like that. That is a problem. And that is one of the problems that we've seen get to extreme levels in certain pockets of social media. Now, be that as it may, get off my soapbox for a second. Justice Moret gave companies, including Apple and Google, a 5-day deadline to remove X from its app stores and block its use on iOS and Android devices. Okay, can be a little bit of an issue, but with it being banned, makes sense. Countries can make their own rules and laws and everything, but I don't think that's as much of a free speech issue because, again, going back to the fire in a crowded theater, if it is an issue where it can spread things that become a real problem, that's an issue. Now, where I do take an issue with is that apparently Justice added that individuals or businesses that are found to be still accessing X by using virtual private networks can be fined 50,000 real or $9,000 US. VPNs. That is a real problem. That is a real freedom of speech issue because it's the same thing if you go and access it over Tor, the Onion router, which is heavily used by journalists and people in countries where censorship is a problem to get around censorship. And I know a lot of people associate it with the dark web and in nefarious boogie things. Trust me, there's far worse things on the ClearNet. We'll talk about the dark web in a whole other video, how it was founded, how it was created by the United States Navy Research Unit and all that. That's a whole other thing. Yeah, there is a real problem, I think, in that aspect of it. We can talk about the yelling fire in a crowded theater thing, but now we're opening up the door to saying, hey, if you're using a VPN, now that can open the door to being a criminal act in and of itself. That I find is a problem. Now, Blue Sky is where a lot of people are flocking to. I'm not a fan of Blue Sky. I still find it heavily in beta. They don't even have proper multi-factor authentication. The decentralization is not properly working from the last I checked, where I can't even properly run my own server as I can with Mastodon. AT Protocol still has its issues. There was even some issues with the leadership there. I've talked a little bit about this in my video talking about decentralized social media. I'm going to have a whole other video talking about Blue Sky and my issues thereof. I do have a Blue Sky account. You can follow me on there, but I'm primarily on Mastodon because I have the better experience over there. Be that as it may, about 2 million people in Brazil have moved over to Blue Sky, apparently. And Brazil is one of the largest markets for Twitter. And I think Twitter is going to continue having this problem if they don't moderate their own their own platform. And they need to understand there's a line between free speech and speech that can infringe upon things. Not all speech is protected speech. That is one thing that we do have to understand. Now, in the United States, yes, we are a little bit more lenient with what's protected speech. But at a certain point, private companies have to understand, just like individuals, yes, it may be legal, but it's still not the right thing. And that's the issue. And freedom of association is the other right that I think a lot of people are forgetting. And a lot of these companies don't want to be associated with certain groups that take too much advantage of this. And that, I think, is a problem. Now, thank you all for watching this. I'm going to get off my soapbox. You can agree or disagree with me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you do like this as a video. And, of course, follow me on the social networks, especially if you're in the Fediverse. See y'all later. Stay safe.